Welcome back to the GOAT Marketing Show. Today we're going to cover the 8 fundamentals of a successful marketing campaign.
Hey everybody, I am Doug Foley, the co-host of this show. I am really excited to dive into this today because these are some traits I have seen across multiple campaigns throughout history. And it's funny, we were talking this week about the documentary on Neat about bourbon, and even watching something that happened way back in the 1930s was still relevant today. So being able to go through these will be really fun today. And these are things you can apply to either evaluate your past campaigns or as you plan for new ones. So I'm really excited to dive into this today.
Okay, so let's get into it. So number 1, marketing is an attention game.
Yeah, I remember seeing Gary Vaynerchuk talk at, I think, Traffic and Conversion 2 or 3 years ago. It was almost right before the pandemic lockdown. And I remember him saying that marketing is an attention game. And so much of what he built into how he hooks his audience really came back to that. And if you go back through history and you think about some of the best campaigns, they really were there to get attention. And that's kind of the premise of all marketing. You're trying to get the attention of an audience and then persuade them or get them to move over and consider either a new idea or look at your product or think of something in a very, very new way. Currently, I mean, if you look at Ryan Reynolds and what he's doing at his agency, Maximum Effort, they're constantly taking things that are happening in the news, grabbing that attention and repositioning the focus to one of his brands, whether that be Mint Mobile or most notably the things he's done for Aviation Gin. So he's mastered the art of capturing attention and refocusing it. But a lot of it came down to figuring out how do we get the attention and how to move it to the next thing.
Right on. And into number 2 is knowing your audience and being able to read the room.
Now, I mentioned in that first example, like getting attention, you can do that wrong. The art of what Ryan Reynolds has done to do that is mastered it. He's figured out how to do really well. And one of the easiest things for most companies to do is to figure out what problems are you solving and who could benefit from them. And when you really dedicate the time and energy to figure out, okay, who is our ideal customer and what's the problem we're solving, you can have a more natural human conversation. If you're coming into a marketplace and you're simply just beating your chest and being, oh, we have the absolute best product and service, you have to buy it, chances are that attention you did get is going to fall flat and you're going to really miss the mark. So if you take the time to look at the data and understand how can we tailor our content and showcase how we show the problem to somebody, and we'll dive into a really specific framework called Upside in a future episode, but really focus on getting to know your audience and understanding how to talk to them.
Amazing. And number 3 leads us into size matters. Can you maybe explain that a little bit more to us, Doug?
Absolutely. I mean, jokingly, size does matter. And the larger and more attentive your audience is, the bigger the opportunity to monetize it. If you think back a few days, and we'll go more to the business to business space for this one, people who started a blog and created this wealth of content did really well. And this was pre-SEO, or maybe in the beginning stages, it was really easy to get your content indexed. But now as we've evolved and we've gone into more of, podcasting and YouTube, which is kind of why we created this show, is to show people how to do it, was understanding how to build the audience, not just necessarily try to market. And the brands who focus on providing value and building an audience have different opportunities and mechanisms to serve. And if you think about some of the things that are now happening with some big brands like Nike, for example, they've built their sneakers app and their sneakers community. They moved away from just trying to market just a product. They've now tried to build communities and build audiences so that when products are being released, they have a way to market it to people. So building it more of an audience rather than a customer base is going to give brands and companies opportunities to really monetize and dive deep with their customers.
Extremely important. Which leads us into number 4, Quoting Gary Vee directly, content is king, but marketing is queen and runs the household.
One of the things that we mentioned was the same talk that Gary gave. He said how important content is. But I think the misnomer that people will misunderstand is how important context is to that game. And understanding that finding the right context, meaning we're creating the right content, we're putting it on the right channel, and we're talking to the right audience is really important. A lot of people will get lazy because it's easy. You know, you'll go on TikTok and that's a good framework, and I'll just post it on Instagram stories, or I'll share a YouTube video to Facebook or LinkedIn. But without understanding the importance of where people are in their journey and sequencing things in the right order, it's very difficult. And I'll give you a real simple example. Like if your company offers a product or service and that thing allows you to do how to videos, like how to solve X with Y, YouTube's probably a really good place to interact with your audience. But if you're more trying to do insights or just general knowledge, you're probably going to be using social channels a little bit different to introduce a new concept or give a different perspective on how to solve a problem they may not have realized. So, understanding where somebody is in the journey and then matching your content and delivering it in the right platform is essential.
Very crucial. And I think that also leads into creating content specific to those platforms and making sure it is relevant to the audience that lives there.
100%.
That leads us to number 5, which is timing is everything.
It is. I mean, as much in dating as it is in marketing, which those two things are so closely related, but I think most people don't see the connect. And if you think about, you know, timing from a dating perspective, if someone walked in and proposed right away, you'd probably be put off or a little freaked out. I mean, maybe if you do it often enough, someone will say yes eventually, but you probably don't want that type of commitment. But from a marketing perspective, understanding how you're building a relationship with somebody is essential. And most people make the mistake of just pitching an offer or a sale or just saying, like, no, you have to try our product without understanding, does this person even have the problem we can solve? Or do they understand that a problem even exists? So, making sure that you time or sequence your content or your offers in the right order are essential to whether or not you're going to close. And we do have a free training that goes through something we call the customer loyalty framework and how to sequence those and how to build out your marketing funnels, which we'll put a link to under this video. But just being considerate of when you're interacting with somebody, making sure that the first interaction adds value. Remember, it's an attention game. It's unlikely you're going to get their attention by telling them how awesome your product is. But if you teach somebody how to solve a problem or say, listen, like, here's what's changed in Facebook's iOS and how it impacts e-commerce businesses, chances are that's going to get somebody's attention because it's a problem they have at that moment in time. And then if you follow it up with, here's how we solve it, that tends to be a lot better way to sequence messaging. So meeting people where they're at with the right message is essential.
Instead of hitting them with the shock factor, you're hitting them at the right points with the right messaging, which will really resonate with them.
Yeah, I mean, there's certain times where some ads and that shock value makes sense. But for most people, and this is why these foundational videos make sense, is following the right order over time is going to give you a lot better results than just trying to go viral.
That leads us into number 6, which is knowing when to ask for the sale.
This is a big one. And two things tend to happen. Either people don't ask and they wonder, well, why am I not seeing conversions? Well, you haven't presented an offer. Or as we've gone through a couple of times, asking too soon. So if it's not clear what your company does or what the product does or how it solves a problem, people just aren't ready to buy. And we see all too often people will run a campaign and yeah, you might have 20% off, 50% off, but if I don't know what that thing is or what it does or how it makes my life better, it's very difficult to drive conversions. So when you think about the creative you're building in this sequence, making sure that that is really clear in the ads and identifying exactly, hey, you've come through, you're now at this point. going back to context being super relevant, knowing where and how to place that ad and knowing how to pick the platforms to ask for the ad. For example, if you ran a content campaign and the video explained, oh, you've introduced the problem, they understand what it is, chances are you're then going to want to run a search ad because they're either going to look for your company or ways to solve the product and then bring them back in with some type of offer. So really understanding that customer journey is essential, but making sure you're not asking too early or too late is really a fine art in driving sales and conversations.
Awesome. And that leads us into number 7, which is location, location, location.
So I think you can tell like picking the right time and the right channel is probably down to the core one of the things I'm most passionate about. Depending on your product or your service will dictate where your audience is and when they're ready to buy. And it's really important for people to understand that you do have to be in more than one channel. So often called an omni-channel or omnipresence approach. Understanding how to interact on those channels and drive the behavior becomes really important. So it might be really easy to get attention on social, but then you want to drive them to something, and it may be something physical. And people often have a disconnect between understanding how to drive a digital experience over to a physical experience. B2B, we see this, trade shows is a really good example. Building that audience with the content on social, but then being able to encourage somebody to come meet you at an event, whether that's a conference for the industry, whether that's your own event, or, whether that's some type of virtual event, getting people to move over into that place where you can build the relationship becomes really essential. When it's a shorter sale, something like e-commerce, it's a little easier to drive some of those direct ones. But when it comes to the B2B space, being more thoughtful about how do we place content to drive behavior, to build a relationship, to get people to where we actually are going to do the transaction, which might be a meeting, a webinar. You might even use a calendar app just to simply book the meeting, but being really cognizant of where do I put my content? Where am I driving them to? And then how do we build that relationship to ultimately have a conversation and do a deal?
And that all leads us to number 8 of the fundamentals, which is consistency is key.
I think one of the reasons you see so few people succeed when it comes to building authority, building an audience, and being able to monetize it is they give up too soon. And I can tell you, like, I've had a podcast started, and after recording about 100 episodes, I just got exhausted. Like, this is so much work. But the benefits generally for most people don't come until about episode 24 to 30. If you're doing weekly, that's 6 months of work before you're like, wow, I haven't really, really had any of those breakthroughs. But if you think about it from this perspective, if you just did one video a month, by the end of the year, you have 12 videos. By the end of 3 years, you have 36 videos. There's 36 pieces of content. And if each one got 1,000 views, which I'll be honest, it's not that hard. If I were to say to somebody, I'm going to consistently put you in front of 36,000 people, or if I'm just going to put you in front of 1,000 people, that's the right audience, what would you be willing to pay to do that? But I think there's a disconnect between the understanding of how that effort contributes to driving sales. And if you can get out of campaign thinking and think more about audience building, like we talked about in point number 1, why this is an attention game, then you start to understand how building that audience, building that following starts and is the tipping point or the tip of the spear of where and how we build a relationship with clients. And when they get used to seeing you week after week, they start to get to know you at a deeper level. And that's when they start to reach out. They say, hey, I've seen you everywhere, on this podcast. I've seen you on stage. I've seen a book you've written. That's when you start to command the authority that creates the flywheel effect that drives business, gets you higher paying clients, allows you other opportunities to just keep raising that bar.
Which is exactly what we're going to do here.
100%. That's why we picked this as a perfect first episode.
Awesome. Well, thank you for elaborating on each of the fundamentals. I think that painted a much clearer picture.
I'm really excited to continue to do these. And the fun part for me is giving people the understanding to just know that this whole process of building a show is not perfect. Like, chances are we'll talk about episode one, look back and be like, oh, that was like, I would have said this different or I would have done that. But I want people to understand that, like, the biggest part about building, an authority platform, building your personal brand is just being okay with understanding it's not perfect. Like, you will evolve, you'll get used to speaking. And that process alone is almost where the audience is going to get to know you as a person better. They'll see the evolution happen. So the fact that we're just doing this, I think, is enough for other people to encourage them. Like, don't be afraid to get started,
Mm-hmm.
and just use those 8 fundamentals to figure out how can I start to put these into play with the marketing activities we're doing, whether it's B2B, whether it's e-commerce, whether it's just a small business. Like, some of these things, just understand, like, there's a lot to be said about building an audience and understanding how to have deeper relationships with your customers.
So what you're saying is take these 8 fundamentals, start where you are with what you have, and just start, really.
100%. Just get after it. This was an awesome one. Thanks so much for joining me today. And audience, thanks for following us on this journey.